I am Ifat Hamid, presenter of BBC Radio Sheffield, a teacher and a business proprietor. My question is, what is your opinion about the profit sent by international companies to avoid paying corporation tax?
Well, we're trying to stop people abusing the system. We've had one or two very bad cases. Starbucks was one, but actually when I got my staff to investigate Starbucks accounts, and we discovered they weren't actually making much money here. So they were accused of dodging tax, but it wasn't quite as bad as it seemed. But you have these people like Google and Amazon who don't seem to be paying tax. Part of the problem is they're very, very clever. Right? They've got very, very complex accounts. And for the inland revenue, trying to work out exactly what they're fiddling, if they are fiddling, is not straightforward. I mean, you know, they will probably have an army of accountants who are creating complicated schemes through tax havens and this kind of thing. And to try to prove that they're actually dodging legal tax is not straightforward, but we are trying to get to grips with it. I mean, the one big change which will kick in April, I don't know whether you're aware of this, there's a new law coming into effect which is called the General Anti-Avoidance Rule. And any individual or company who arranges their tax in a way that is defying the spirit of Parliament will be liable to heavy penalties. In other words, if they may be observing the letter, but if they're deliberately flouting the spirit of the law, they can be heavily penalised. And this is designed to stop companies bringing in very abusive, complicated tax dodges. And, you know, Barclays Bank, for example, applied a whole army of people to dodge tax. And they were paying some of their leading people, and when Bob Diamond was there, 30 million a year, you know, just to work out complicated tax schemes to avoid paying tax, and that's now been stopped. So, you know, it is infuriating when you're a business, right, and you're up here in Sheffield and you're paying your value-added tax and you're paying your company tax and you know you can't avoid it, to see these guys playing games. But we are cracking down as best we can in a complicated situation.
Thank you. Sheffield. Hello, Mr. Cable. I work for a charity which provides support to smaller voluntary community organisations, your civil society organisations. And since last year, we've seen an increase in help working with advice sector organisations and those organisations providing food in crisis for people and communities that are struggling. My question is, do you think more could be done to help ask businesses for their corporate social responsibility to help give more to struggling communities, and particularly the voluntary sector, which could make do with helping more communities? We're talking to Tata Steel. They are giving us some resources to help set up food banks. So can you give tax breaks to more companies that can help actually provide support to communities?
Is that task next week, tomorrow?
Yes.
Well, it's, I mean, there are two different things. There's the question about companies being socially responsible. And Tata's are probably actually the best example in the country of a very, very responsible employer, which is here for the long term. They ignore short-term problems. They just keep investing. They're very good employers. But there are a lot of cowboys around, right? You know, who don't do that and break the rules and try to get away with as little as they can. And it's part of our job, of people like me, to try to make sure the business community behaves properly. At the moment, I'm putting some laws through Parliament on executive pay, because some of those guys were just being paid astronomical sums without justification, and we're now making sure that every executive pay award for FTSE companies or big quoted companies has to be, there's a binding vote of shareholders to make them more responsible. But at the end of the day, you know, providing companies obey the law, you can't force them to be generous. You know, it depends on the people who own them. The one other thing I would put to you is, do you make use of this big society bank that's been launched?
I think the view is that in terms of risk and in terms of loans, that actually the big society bank is more about loans.
Right.
And some of the work that we do, or some of the frontline organisations that provide work and support, they haven't got the proven track record in terms of outcomes for that risk
Just
taken.
getting underway,
Yeah.
is that? Yeah. Okay.
Zishan, the last one.
Thank you. I've been Zishan Latif, editor of local newspaper ILM News, which you got a look at earlier on. I've got a couple of questions for you. My first question is that what is your opinion on the new government rule where the council tenants are having to pay further tax on the spare bedroom?
Well, this is, yeah, I know it's arousing a lot of passion, this. I mean, if you, they're not paying tax, it's the fact that they don't get the same housing benefits. And the idea behind it is to treat people in council accommodation on the same basis as people in private accommodation. If you are a private tenant and you get housing benefit, it depends on the number of rooms you've got and how you use your accommodation. That doesn't apply in council housing. So they're trying to make it equal. Now the problem is that some of the people who have extra rooms are disabled people, right? And they've got an extra room because they want an oxygen cylinder or there's a carer or something, and we've got to look after those people and make sure they're not hurt. And the councils have been given a big discretionary fund, about 50 million, in order to make sure that hard cases like that are properly looked after. So, like with a lot of things, I talked to Shahak about the way that the Labour people in Sheffield are making enormous fuss about cuts, which are wildly exaggerated. Similarly, this so-called bedroom tax, I mean, there is an issue, I don't deny it, particularly for disabled people. But the amount of hysteria that's been generated is totally disproportionate.
Okay. My final question to you again is, what can the government do about the outsourcing of the jobs to overseas countries when we have a massive unemployment in the UK itself?
I think outsourcing is now going into reverse, actually. There was a lot of outsourcing, and it may still happen in some cases. But the evidence we're picking up is that a lot of companies are now bringing the work back. And they're doing it for two reasons. The first is the exchange rate. The sterling exchange rate is now about 20% more favourable to companies producing here. It's reducing the sterling cost and making it much more profitable to do things here rather than outsource. And even in industries like textiles, which we thought had disappeared, are now coming back because outsourcing isn't so profitable. The second is that a lot of companies are beginning to realise if you produce stuff at the other side of the world, you get serious disruption. You know, the Japanese were hit by that Fukushima disaster. Their car factories, Honda and so on, ground to a halt, and they realised it would have been better to have British suppliers, and that's what they're now doing. So I think for reasons of security of supply, a lot of that outsourcing is now going into reverse. And I'm working with the car industry, for example, to try and make sure that more of their supply chain is here, and that is happening. We can't force them. The government can't force companies to do it, but we can encourage what is actually quite a positive trend.
How is that helping the unemployment in the UK?
Well, because the companies are coming back. And as I said earlier, I mean, we do have unemployment, and it is worrying, but it's much lower than it is in Western Europe. It's much lower than in the United States. Now, we have an economic problem, but it's not as bad. The unemployment problem isn't as bad these days. I think in Spain they've got, what, 50%?
Yeah, Spain is
Nothing remotely like that.
okay. Right, can I now ask